Welcome back to the CMMC Readiness video series. This series follows a chronological order, so hopefully you watched the first video in this series, which was completing an asset inventory. And if you recall from that video, I mentioned that in every video in this series, I'm going to walk you through each step for preparing for a CMMC Level 1 and Level 2 assessment. This may not be the CMMC type of webinars that you're used to, where you get to sit back, relax, and just ponder on what to do. No, not at all. We are all about action execution. So my aim with every video is to give you the tools, templates, and expert guidance so that you can execute, break that analysis paralysis. We need to execute. No more waiting around, no more pondering or just listening to the experts pontificate on what's expected for CMMC. We are here to get busy. In this video, we are going to focus on CMMC Level 1 scoping. Pretty straightforward. Aspire Cyber is used as the sample company for this video series, giving you explicit, practical examples on how Aspire Cyber completed the specific activity. I always prefer starting off with letting viewers know why should you care. So as a federal contractor, you should care about CMMC Level 1 because the Federal Acquisition Regulation Clause 52.204-21, also known as FAR 21, is a requirement for all federal contractors that process, store, and transmit federal contract information. I'm going to provide more detail in the following slides of what is federal contract information, but just know if you're a federal contractor, then this contractual requirement likely is a clause in your contract. This is not where you can wait around for the CMMC 2.0 rule to be finalized. This has been a contractual requirement for federal contractors since 2021. So those are 15 basic cybersecurity safeguards to protect federal contract information. And just to put that into context for you, if you have this clause in your federal contract or your teaming agreement, if you're a subcontractor, every time that you submit an invoice to the federal government, whichever federal agency you are supporting, then that is your explicit attestation that you are in compliance with this contractual clause, that you have fully implemented these 15 security requirements and that you're properly safeguarding federal contract information. You want to avoid making fraudulent claims of compliance as a result of either deliberately not complying or out of ignorance, you didn't understand the requirements. So that's why you're going through this video series with me. You want to make sure you not only that you understand the requirements, that you have the tools, templates, and resources to implement those controls on your in-scope systems. Let's continue. Now, what is federal contract information? Easiest way to summarize it is government information that is not intended for public release. Any information that you're receiving in the context of your federal contract or subcontract that's not intended for public release is categorized as federal contract information. And as a result, you have that contractual legal obligation to implement those 15 requirements outlined in FAR 21, which maps to NIST SPA 171 to protect that federal contract information on all of those systems. And then if it's federal contract information, physically protecting that information. Pretty straightforward. Let's take a look at some examples of federal contract information. Now, this is certainly not an exhaustive list. I just want to give you a couple examples to give you an idea of what type of information would fall into the category of FCI. Think about delivery dates for the product that you're delivering to the government, and that's not public information. Schedules. Also, what's commonly overlooked is non-public requests for proposals. So think about those RFPs, RFIs that you have to log into sam.gov, for example. That means that information is not public because you have to first register your company and you have to log into sam.gov in order to view those solicitations, which by default, that makes those solicitations federal contract information. So you have a responsibility to protect them as a federal contractor or subcontractor. So it's pretty straightforward. FCI is pretty broad. Now, an alternative to what would not be considered FCI, let's use Army. Go to the DoD website or any federal agency's website, that information that's just on the public website that anyone can access, then that would not be considered federal contract information. Hopefully that provides a little clarity, but don't worry, we're going to keep going to reinforce to make sure you understand what is federal contract information, because CMMC Level 1 is a really good starting point. It's that first bite, or think about crawling before you walk. CMMC Level 2, you're in a full out sprint. So that's why I'm strategically starting with CMMC Level 1, walking you through each step and building on the momentum as we go through this series. So you should already, so if you've completed asset inventory video number 1 in this series, you should already have your asset inventory documented. Now we're doing the next step. So each step is chronological order. So please, 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 please do not jump around, because I'm very intentional about the order of these videos, because they build on top of each other. So you don't want to build your program without having that foundation, essentially building on quicksand. It's not going to be sustainable. You need the foundation. That's why we did the asset inventory first. Now that we have identified our assets, we need to understand the scoping. We want to reduce the scope. In this case, the CMMC Level 1 / FAR 21 scope. And the reason I say slash, because as we know, CMMC is not a final rule yet, but the CMMC requirements for Level 1 map directly back to FAR 21. That's why it's critical to understand that CMMC is not imposing new requirements. CMMC is essentially think of it as a verification program, verifying compliance with existing contractual requirements. So your existing FAR 21 contractual requirement, based on the CMMC proposed rule, CMMC Level 1 will be an annual self-assessment. However, a senior representative from the organization will have to sign off and attest that this CMMC Level 1 self-assessment has been completed. Going back to that attestation, you don't want to fraudulently attest to the government. That can end badly. We want to avoid that. Okay, before we take a look at the various types of assets that are outlined in the CMMC Level 1 scoping guide, I want to ensure that you understand what I mean when I say process, store, transmit FCI, federal contract information. If your in-scope systems are processing FCI, think about your laptop where you're accessing your OneDrive that stores FCI, or you think about you receiving emails from your prime or your federal customer, and likely that's going to be categorized as FCI. So that laptop is processing the FCI, and then let's say you're using Microsoft Outlook, then Microsoft is storing that FCI. That FCI is being stored on Microsoft servers, their data centers, they're storing and also transmitting that FCI. Or you can be storing FCI in the memory of your printer or fax machine, thumb drive, external drive, for examples of where you could store FCI, or even the hard drive of your laptop, storing FCI. And then if your organization allows BYOD, your employees to use their personal devices to access FCI, which I wouldn't encourage that. But if you do, then their phones, their mobile devices could be storing FCI, processing it, and or transmitting that FCI. And transmit it from one asset to another, physical or digital. Any asset that process, stores, or transmits FCI. So I really wanted to dig a little deeper into that, because you're going to hear me say that often throughout this series. You need to understand what I mean by processing, storing, transmitting. All right, crystal clear? Good, great, got it. Now let's take a look at each asset that's included in the Level 1 scoping. As we just discussed in detail, the FCI assets, process, store, transmit, FCI. That's just some examples of assets. This list is not exhaustive, but just some examples of assets that can process, store, transmit FCI. I mentioned computers, laptops, servers, your Microsoft 365, AWS, Google Drive, Dropbox. Also, can't overlook your MSP, external service provider, users, those all can be in scope as FCI assets. And anything that you categorize as an FCI asset are part of the CMMC self-assessment scope for level 1. So those FCI assets are assessed against the 15 practices. And those practices come from this SP 800-171. They map back to FAR 21 or CMMC level 1. So it's all interchangeable. When I say CMMC level 1, know that I'm talking about FAR 21, or if I say FAR 21, know that maps to CMMC level. Now, you see why it was so important for us to start off with doing the asset inventory. We need to know what our assets are before we can start scoping properly. So now that we have that list of assets, we can go through that list and say, okay, which ones are FCI assets? Which of these assets are processing, storing, or transmitting FCI? And properly categorize those assets. Now, with any type of assessment that you're doing, you want to limit that scope. So if you can limit where that FCI is being processed, stored, or transmitted, that takes assets out of scope, and you don't have to assess those assets against the applicable CMMC practices. So if not every user in your company needs to access FCI because they're not working on that contract, then don't give them access to the FCI. You don't need to store FCI on thumb drives or external hard drives, then don't do it. Make sure you want to limit the scope. So that also limits your attack surface, limit the risk of that FCI being accessed by unauthorized persons. If your MSP, your external service provider, whoever's doing your IT or support, if they don't need to access FCI, don't give them access. That helps limit the scope. Next, we have out of scope assets. So I mean, they do not process, store, or transmit FCI, kind of just what I was talking about, where you want to take as many of your assets out of scope as possible. If it's feasible to take it out of scope, then I highly recommend you do so. It's less time, money, resources you're spending on assessing against those practices. So some examples, maybe your guest Wi-Fi, only guests are accessing that Wi-Fi network and they don't have access to FCI, or your Dropbox or your Zoom, personal devices. Those are examples of assets that are out of scope. It always comes back to what's in scope. Is it processing, storing, or transmitting that FCI? The requirements follows the information, follows that sensitive information. In this context, follows the FCI. Wherever it goes, those 15 requirements follow. Lastly, in the CMMC level 1 scoping guide, we have specialized assets. So these assets may or may not process, store, or transmit FCI. Just some of the examples: government property, test equipment, restricted information systems. So think about if you're working on a contract where the government issues you a laptop, and that's a government-owned laptop, that would be an example of a specialized asset. You would categorize in your asset inventory as a specialized asset, but the specialized assets would not be part of the level 1 CMMC self-assessment scope. You would not have to assess that asset against those 15 requirements. Same with test equipment. Think about your oscilloscopes or your manufacturing various types of test equipment. Be considered specialized assets, IoT. So it's pretty straightforward for level 1. These are your 3 assets. Either it's an FCI asset, out of scope asset, or specialized asset. Of these 3 categories of assets, the only one that you have to perform the self-assessment against the 15 requirements is going to be the FCI assets. So again, you want to minimize that scope as much as possible. I warned you, every video we're getting busy. Now this is the interactive implementation portion of this video. I'd like you to pull out your asset inventory, and we're just focusing on that federal contract information. So the FCI, let's look at this example for Aspire Cyber, the Dell Inspiron laptop that is used to access Microsoft 365. FCI is being stored whether it's email or OneDrive or SharePoint in our version of Microsoft 365, which makes that laptop an FCI asset. Therefore, it is going to be in scope for the CMMC Level 1 self-assessment and going to be assessed against the 15 applicable practices. Microsoft 365, it's an FCI asset as well. Office printer, if you're printing out FCI, then it is processing and potentially storing FCI. And mobile devices, if we're not allowing mobile devices, they're not accessing any FCI, you mark those as out of scope. Next, the guest Wi-Fi network, we're also categorizing that out of scope because no FCI is being processed, stored, or transmitted on the guest Wi-Fi network. Pretty straightforward. Now it's time for your pop quiz to see if you're retaining information that I'm sharing. Let's say if we have a government issued laptop, what category asset is that? Is it an FCI asset, out of scope asset, or a specialized asset? Since this video is not live, I can't get your answers. Hopefully you're following along at home or at the office, but it would be a specialized asset. If it's just being a specialized asset, that government laptop would not be assessed against the CMMC Level 1/FAR 2115 requirements. You have your asset inventory, walk you through how to actually perform the scoping for CMMC Level 1. There's 3 categories. You have your FCI assets, out of scope assets, and then also your specialized assets. So just to add to your arsenal, you have your Level 1 self-assessment guide, the link to that, CIS 18, you can access the asset inventory spreadsheet template. Aspire Cyber, we do have the CMMC Proof private LinkedIn group. Highly encourage you to join that group so you can collaborate with other federal contractors and CMMC experts. And then make sure you're following each episode of the CMMC Level 2 readiness video series, where we're walking you through each step. We completed the asset inventory, and now we've completed the CMMC Level 1 scoping. So baby steps. And don't worry, we're going to get to the point where we're running full speed, but you have to work your way up to that point. I want to make sure you don't get overwhelmed. Make sure you have all the tools, templates, and resources you need to be successful. And my aim is to help you ultimately conquer CMMC so that it can be your competitive advantage. Now, if you're looking for more hands-on guidance, more details into completing the CMMC Level 1, I am offering a boot camp over 4 weeks virtually for 2 hours per week, deep diving into completing a CMMC Level 1 self-assessment to help ensure that you are in compliance with your current FAR 21 contractual requirements, to fully understand how to implement those cybersecurity requirements to protect that FCI. If you are interested, certainly contact me and I'll be happy to sign you up for the boot camp. And if your organization would like to work with me to customize a CMMC Level 1 boot camp for you, I'd be happy to do so, because this is a great starting point for them, help them build that momentum, and most importantly, help them comply with their existing contractual requirements. And if you need me, you know where to find me, aspirecyber.com. Feel free to email me, dphillips@aspirecyber.com. I'm here to help. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you follow this channel, comment, let me know other types of videos you would like to see and how I can help assist in making CMMC compliance easy for you, because that is the mission that Aspire Cyber is on. Till next time.